everyone. Thank you for joining. So this is the fifth and final session of our fall program for VISIM. And thank you for joining this presentation series. Today we'll be hearing from Sania Seilabi and Mehranfar, who will be presenting their work. So each presentation should be about 20 minutes, and then there'll be about 10 minutes for Q&A. Just really feel free to interact and ask questions. And I'd like to point out that the meeting is being recorded and will be posted later on the VISIM website. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. So Sania Seilabi is a National Science Foundation eFellows postdoctoral fellow at the University of Buffalo Civil Engineering Department. And Sania received her PhD from Purdue University School of Civil Engineering, where she served as a research assistant at the USDOT Center for Connected and Automated Transportation. She received her Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and Master's degree in Civil Engineering with a specialization in earthquake engineering from Sharif University of Technology in Tehran, Iran. And Sania has conducted research in a variety of areas related to advanced transportation mobility technologies, such as connected and autonomous vehicles and their implications for developing sustainable transportation infrastructure design and management. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sania.
Thank you, Adrian. So, let me... my presentation.
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Okay. Okay. So hello all, and thank you again for inviting me to this seminar. So my name is Sania Seilabi, and this presentation is on managing dedicated lanes for connected and autonomous vehicles to address bottleneck congestion, considering morning peak commuter departure choices. So road infrastructure planning is necessary to improve the quality of the roadways, to reduce user delay and promote economic development. And emergence of technologies such as CAVs will provide valuable opportunity for planners to develop innovative transportation planning strategies. So CAVs can benefit traffic congestion mitigation through driving behaviors such as reduced headways and platooning. Now, the question that we have tried to address in this research is how to leverage these benefits during transition period with mixed stream of CAVs and HDVs. So we know that in the transition period, we will have CAVs and HDVs on the roads, and this mixed stream of CAVs and HDVs will basically compromise the efficacy of CAVs in reducing the headways and increasing the capacity of the roadway. And therefore, in this work, we have investigated deployment of CAV dedicated lanes, which will result in reduced headways and therefore increased lane capacity. So according to the Society of Automotive Engineers, there are 6 levels of vehicle automation: level 0 with no automation to level 5 with full self-driving automation. The focus of this research is on the impact of CAVs on the design of transportation infrastructure, where there exist only HDVs and fully automated CAVs. So what is a traffic bottleneck? So a traffic bottleneck is a localized disruption of vehicular traffic on a street, road, or highway. For example, here at the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, people experience morning peak bottleneck congestion during the morning peak period as they travel from home to work. So here is a summary of literature review on CAV dedicated lane deployment. So there are research in a network level and also in corridor level. These studies consider different objectives. For example, they consider minimizing cost of safety and total travel time, minimizing just the total travel time or cost of network adjustment and so on. In corridor level, the objective is to maximize the highway throughput. And these studies have considered different travel decisions for the travelers, which in network level is route and lane choice, in corridor level is lane choice, and there are also other congestion management strategies considered in this study, such as lane-specific tolling scheme or cordon-based tolling scheme. So in this study, the objective is to minimize the total travel cost, which consists of travel time and a schedule delay. The traveler's decisions is the lane choice and also the departure time choice of the travelers. And as other congestion management strategy, we are implementing a lane-specific time-varying tolling scheme in our study. So basically, this research aims to study the morning commute problem during the transition horizon with a mixed stream of CAVs and HDVs. So in this problem, commuters pass a highway bottleneck during the morning peak period between a residential area and a workplace. So the highway bottleneck includes multiple lanes categorized as CAV dedicated lanes or CAVLs and general purpose lanes or GPLs. And there are two groups of commuters, human driven vehicles or HDVs and connected and autonomous vehicles or CAVs. So, and morning peak period is divided into T time intervals, and we are implementing a time varying lane specific tolling scheme during the morning peak period. So here is a list of research contributions. First, the study aims to develop a framework for managing morning congestion in a highway bottleneck during the transition horizon with CAVs and HDVs, considering the commuters' departure time choices. So we are mathematically analyzing lane and departure time choice impacts on CAV and HDV travel costs and travel times for CAV dedicated lanes and general purpose lanes. And finally, we have developed a system optimal design model as a linear problem to minimize the total system cost. So here is a list of assumptions for this problem. We are assuming that CAV commuters have lesser value of time compared to the HDV commuters. The capacity of the CAVL is assumed to be higher than that of general purpose lanes, which is due to the reduced headways between the vehicles for CAVs. So HDV commuters are only allowed to use general purpose lanes, but CAVs can use general purpose lanes and also CAV dedicated lanes. So commuters are identical in terms of the desired arrival time and a scheduled delay penalty. And upon reaching the bottleneck, commuters are served in a first in, first out order, where the lane changing behavior of commuters is not considered in this study. And also, we are assuming that the free flow travel time of the bottleneck is equal to 0, and therefore the travel time only consists of the queuing delay at the bottleneck. So basically here you can see the highway bottleneck with multiple lanes. So we have CAV dedicated lanes and general purpose lanes. And we are transforming it into a network in which each of these lanes will link in this network between home and workplace. The travel cost of commuters under CAV dedicated lane and tolling policies consists of a scheduled delay cost, travel time cost, and time varying lane specific toll. And under the equilibrium conditions, CAV commuters cannot reduce their travel costs further by unilaterally changing their departure times and lanes. But for HDV, commuters can reduce the travel costs further by unilaterally changing only their departure times, because they can only use general purpose lanes and they don't have lane choice. So the equilibrium conditions are formulated as mixed linear complementarity problem. So we have a user equilibrium conditions for CAV and HDV commuters, which is used to basically capture the departure times of the commuters. We have CAV restriction for HDV commuters, meaning that HDVs cannot use CAV dedicated lanes, queuing delay constraints to derive the travel times, and early arrival time constraints to evaluate the schedule delay penalty for the commuters, and finally travel demand conservation constraints. So to develop a system optimal tolling strategy for a single highway bottleneck, it is proof that travelers experience zero queuing delays under the system optimal conditions. And therefore, under given a number of CAV dedicated lane, system optimal departure rates can be derived using this linear program. So we are minimizing the total travel cost under the system optimal design, subject to bottleneck capacity constraints, CAV restriction constraints for HDV commuters, travel demand conservation constraints, and positive departure rates. And the Lagrangian multiplier of this constraint will give us the tolling scheme. And after deriving the tolling scheme, we use an enumeration method to derive the optimal number of CAV dedicated lanes. So here is the enumeration method used to derive the optimal CAV and tolling strategy. So in each iteration in this method, we determine the total travel cost, and a reduction in the total travel cost will convert one general purpose lane to a CAV dedicated lane. So in this section, we want to analyze the impacts of the number of CAV dedicated lane and tolling strategies under different CAV market penetration rates on the total system cost, and also lane and departure time choices of the commuters. So during the morning peak period, the CAV and HDV commuters will travel along the highway with 4 lanes, in which the total travel demand of commuters is assumed to be equal to 1,000. The morning peak period is divided into 100 time intervals, and the desired arrival time is the 70th time interval. The capacities of CAVL and or CAV dedicated lane and general purpose lanes are assumed to be equal to 30 and 10 vehicles per time interval. Early and late arrival penalties are assumed to be 0.8 and $4 per time interval for CAV and HDV commuters. And finally, we are assuming that the value of time for CAV and HDV is equal to $1 and $2 per time interval. So for this problem, first we analyze the total system cost on the different number of CAV dedicated lanes and also CAV market penetration rates without considering a tolling scheme. So this strategy is referred to as the CAVL only. So in this figure, basically you can see the total system cost under the user equilibrium conditions for different CAV market penetrations, and also for different number of CAV dedicated lanes. For instance, here for zero number of CAV dedicated lanes, the total system cost will initially decrease as CAV market penetration rate increases. And this is mainly due to the reduction of the value of time for this CAV commuters. And after reaching a minimum at around 45%, we can see that the total travel cost will increase as CAV market penetration rate increases. This is basically because CAV commuters have lesser value of time. And because of that, as the market penetration rate for CAVs increases, more commuters will choose to depart closer to the desired arrival time, despite incurring higher queuing delays due to traffic congestion. And therefore, the total system cost will increase as the CAV market penetration rate increases. And the similar pattern can be observed for 1, 2, and 3 CAV dedicated lanes. So we are using this figure to basically decide about the optimal number of CAV dedicated lanes. So we have divided it into 4 regions, and you can see that for each of these regions, the total system cost is minimum for one of these curves. So for example, in the first region, for a 0 CAV dedicated lanes, we have the minimum system cost. And then for 1, 2, and 3 CAVs in each of these regions. So this figure shows the equilibrium travel cost under different CAV market penetration rates with considering the optimal CAV dedicated lanes. So basically, you can see that here that deployment of CAV dedicated lanes also leads to reduction in travel costs of the HDV users. This is because although CAV will cause a reduction in road capacity for HDVs, but it can also lead to an increase in available capacity as CAVs prefer to use CAV dedicated lanes with high capacity. And as the CAV market penetration increases, more vehicles move to these dedicated lanes, and this increases the mobility of the system and also leads to reduction in travel costs for HDVs as CAV market penetration rate increases. So this figure shows the total system cost under different optimal strategies in terms of CAV dedicated lanes and tolling scheme for different market penetration rates. So we can see that when we have 0 CAVL, the total system cost will remain unchanged for as the CAV market penetration rate increases. It is because commuters experience 0 queuing delay under the system optimal condition, as we discussed before, and therefore change in the percentages of CAVs and HDVs won't have any effect on the total system cost. But you can see that for 1, 2, and 3 CAV dedicated lanes, the total system cost will be decreasing. And this is because it is correct that we are increasing the capacity of the roadway with basically allocating lanes to CAVs with high capacities. But because this capacity is only available to CAVs, the total system cost will decrease only with CAV market penetration. And here also we have used the same strategy for to find the optimal number of CAV dedicated lanes in each region. In each of these regions, the total system cost is minimum for one of these curves, as you can see. So this graph shows a comparison of the total system cost under optimal CAV dedicated lanes with a tolling scheme with optimal CAVL only a scheme for different CAV market penetrations. So we can see that the total system cost under the system optimal, approximately half of that under the optimal CAVL only. And as the CAV market penetration increases, we can see that the system cost difference between the scheme, the two schemes reduces which shows the basically and highlights the advantage of deploying CAV dedicated lanes. Now, this figure shows the average of the time varying toll for CAV commuters on their system optimal design for different CAV market penetration rates. So this figure shows higher tolls on GPLs, which is mostly incurred by the HDB users. So when CAV penetration is low, HDB commuters experience much higher tolling expenses in contrast to the CAV commuters. And as the CAV market penetration increases, the average tolling scheme of the HDB commuters decreases, and this decreasing trend will continue until at some point it will even be lower than that for the CAV users. This is because of the fact that at this 75%, we have 3 lanes allocated to CAVs, which leads to sufficient capacity for CAVs, and therefore HDB commuters need to pay less to use the remaining lane, and this will reduce the average toll for the HDBs. And also, given the fact that we are assuming a constant travel demand, the total toll revenue collected by the agency is reduced as the CAV market penetration rate increases, and this shows the importance of exploring other resources for maintaining the transportation infrastructure in the CAV era. In this research, we proposed a framework to alleviate the traffic congestion in a highway corridor with a mixed stream of CAVs and HDBs using CAV dedicated lane, and also considering a lane-specific time varying tolling scheme. So we showed that HDB commuters' travel costs reduces as CAV market penetration increases by deploying CAV dedicated lanes. And also we showed that the difference between CAV and HDB travel costs reduces as CAV market penetration rate increases. And also the computational experiments showed that CAV market penetration with increasing the CAV market penetration, the agency revenue in terms of tolling can be reduced. So thank you, and I would be happy to hear your questions if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you. Any questions?
I do have some questions. Thank you, Sania. I think that this was nice work, and also congratulations on your new position. I think you may have started this fall, so that's wonderful. And so the couple of questions that I have, and I think that it seems that adding the dedicated lanes, it may also reduces the cost by human-driven vehicles. And so in some sense, this might reduce the incentive to purchase an automated vehicle and to increase the market penetration rate. And I think that the results that you presented they're similar to other discussions that I've had, but I don't know if you could comment on that a little bit. And then a little bit as a technical note, which I'm not quite sure if I understand the implications. You told us that an important assumption that you made is that the value of time of human-driven vehicles is higher for those drivers than it is for those that are in automated vehicles. And so I'm just not sure if the results and conclusions hinge on this assumption. Normally, when we're talking about value of time, correctly or incorrectly, we assume that that this is related to incomes, but I'm not sure how important this assumption is. Anyways, again, thank you for a nice talk.
Sure, thank you, Professor. So basically, for your first question, so basically we have showed that with increasing CAV market penetration, as we are adding more CAV dedicated lanes, the cost for HDV users is being reduced. So I think that your question was that this will encourage the travelers to purchase more CAVs?
The opposite.
More HDVs?
Well, there is no incentive to shift to the different technology because my costs are declining.
Yeah. So basically, until some point, toward the end of the transition horizon, the cost for the HDV users was higher. But at around like 95% CAVs, so we have like very few HDVs left on the network. So, or at this bottleneck. So basically, what was I discussing was that for that few remaining HDVs, the inequity between CAVs and HDVs will reduce toward the end. But at the same time, before that point, before we are allocating 3 lanes to CAVs, the cost for HDVs was higher for CAVs. And there are like many other advantages to CAVs. And I'm guessing that by that time, like people would want to switch to CAVs. And for your second question, so we are considering a lesser value of time for CAVs. Is it correct that value of time can be a proxy of the income? But here, considering a lesser value of time for CAVs is basically related to the fact that while using CAVs, travelers can do other things. They don't have to concentrate on just driving. So, and basically that's the reason that is like some research, they basically have suggested that CAVs have lesser value of time. But what you said is also correct. It's also a proxy of income, and high income group of the society will have higher value of time. But that is not considered in this research. Thank you for your questions.
I see a hand up, Arnold.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sania, for this presentation. I have a remark, and then I have 2 questions. The first would be that following up on Professor Cohen's question regarding whether this assumption that the CAV travelers have a lower value of travel time, whether the results hinge on that assumption. I think that's interesting to follow up on, and maybe a sensitivity analysis would be relevant if it hasn't already been done, because there's also work out in the field, and me knowing also from first-hand experience that there is work on the field that also shows that perhaps people will not use this time productively, and that's still uncertain, that's still not known, and if that affects your results, then I would find that relevant. As to my questions, I wanted to follow up. So if I understand you correctly, the where you played around with a toll, you applied, if I understand correctly, and please correct me, because this is what my follow-up question depends on. You played around with a mathematical model trying to say that if you introduce a toll, you will reduce the peak hour travel and push the demand onto fringe times. Is that correct?
So basically, for the tolling scheme, we are using a system optimal design. We are not playing around with toll too. So this is what the solution of the system optimal would basically give us.
Okay, but is the demand then a variable where you set the toll in a certain way so that the demand reduces? Is that correct? if you introduce a toll, you put a price on people traveling on the road, right?
Yes.
And by putting that price on, you're reducing the demand on the road.
So basically, okay, so basically the overall demand is assumed to be constant for this research. Just the percentages of CAVs and HDVs will change. So higher tolls would mean that people would want to switch more to the other option.
I see. Okay. So you put a toll on human-driven vehicles so that people switch to CAVs.
So the toll is also on CAVs, but it's the toll that the solution is giving us is higher for HDVs.
Okay. Now I understand that better, and
So,
my second question is moot. Thank you.
thank you.
Pablo, I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, a question about the reliability of the technology, particularly with higher volumes in the CAV lanes. Have you tried running the simulation with different rates of random events on the network? And does the recovery from those events affect the findings?
So basically, this is just a bottleneck, so it's not a network. So can you give an example of like the incidents that you mean that might happen?
Well, I'm thinking about, I mean, I'm ranging from just simple underlying flaws, potential flaws in the technology that would cause some minor interruption in the spacing of vehicles with cascading effects to outright random failures of the technology, perhaps forcing moving out of automated operation. I mean, are you assuming that in every simulation the technology is working perfectly? And if it doesn't work perfectly, how might that affect the outcomes?
Okay, now I understand your question.
Yeah.
So thank you for these questions. This is a macro level problem. So basically, I actually have a sensitivity analysis considering like different capacities that we can achieve for CAVs. Mm-hmm. So on a range of 1 to 4. So what I presented was for CAV capacity for being 3 times higher than that for HDVs. But I have done a sensitivity analysis for a range of capacities from 1 to 4. But basically, this is a macro level problem. I'm just like assuming like a range of the capacities, but it's very interesting to basically do research on what you just mentioned on like the micro level issues that might happen.
Okay. So thank you. With that, I guess, thank you, Sania, once again. And I guess we'll transition over into Hamed's presentation. So Hamed, if you could please start sharing your screen and I can go ahead and introduce you. So Hamed Mehranfar is a doctoral candidate in the chair of infrastructure management at the Institute of Construction and Infrastructure Management at ETH Zurich. Hamed obtained his master's degree in railway transportation engineering with a focus on railway operations management from Iran University of Science and Technology in 2019. Before joining ETH, he collected experience in applications of operations research in the railway industry by working in a railway transportation company from 2019 to 2020. Hamed's research focuses on developing different tools for enabling asset managers to make better decisions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Hamed. Thank you. I think you're muted.
Yeah. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah. So thank you very much for having me here, and it's a great pleasure to be here in the very last session of this seminar. I have my colleague beforehand in the very first session of these seminars, David Zani. He also presented his work here, which is very nice. Okay, today I'm going to be talking about actually the work that I'm doing in my doctoral research, which has to do with providing some tools in order to optimize intervention planning for the railway infrastructure. So before I come here in Iran, we didn't use that much of time trains basically, and rarely we use train mostly because of going to the vacations or stuff like that. So having delays and things like that wasn't that much of issue because we were on vacation basically most of the time. So it didn't matter for us if travel that usually takes 12 hours takes 14 hours, right? But in countries like Switzerland, these kind of delays are really important. And rail manager really try to find ways to reduce this kind of delays and consequently maximize the capacity that they can use in the timetables. One of the reasons that there is long delays in the railway system is basically doing maintenance activities, and it is all over the place, and it makes a bit decentralized using the railway systems. And if you go like the social media, you can see there are tons of media people make fun of these timetables, and they say, yeah, it's just a joke, so we cannot really rely on that. And in response, some railway companies, for example, in our neighboring country in Germany, there are really long delays, and although like punctuality rate is around 80%, but it is thanks to canceling a lot of trains. So, railway companies, for example, in Switzerland, they try to inform passengers about these kind of long-term delays through their website. For example, they can say, during this period, you might have some cancellation or some long delays in your corridor that you use, and people can prepare themselves for that. And not only that, they try to modernize their fleet to accelerate the speed of executing this kind of intervention activities. And also they try to postpone this kind of intervention activities in order to satisfy their customers. But at the end of the day, they say it's really challenging because if you focus in the small network, you can handle this in qualitative manner. But if you want to look at really dense network, you really need to have a systematic approach to think about it and address this issue. And that was basically a major incentive that my supervisor, Professor Adi, and I decided to work on this project. And we thought that if we can answer these 5 basic questions, we can help railway manager to improve their intervention planning process. So my colleague is here, Steve. He mostly working with the process mapping and stuff like that. So he did a lot of interview with people in Swiss railway company, and by looking at this process, we realized that there are some rooms for improvement. So, for example, we realized that there is better way to predict this kind of intervention requirements more quantitatively and in more detail. So, for example, for the case of the bridges, we realize that there are different points in the time that different decisions at different level of detail are being made. For example, 15 years ahead of the execution time, they use their deterministic model to come up with the rough idea of what intervention activities needed, and then 5 years later, they verify these intervention requirements with their inspectors, and then they can decide to send it for preliminary studies for the executions. So we realize that in the beginning, in the initial phases of this intervention planning process, something is missing. There is a systematic approach is needed here to help bridge manager or in general asset manager to decide which kind of intervention activities is needed with the better accuracy and with more level of detail. So we proposed a probabilistic framework, and the reason is that for example, for the moment, they have this kind of deterministic models and they use it, but they don't really rely on the result of these models because there is a lot of uncertainties associated with the iteration processes and stuff like that. So if you, so there are two ways to handle that. If you want to use your deterministic model, either you can just ignore these existing uncertainties, or you can use a lot of fancy modeling to consider all of these things. But there is a lot of assumption in those kind of modeling. So we propose a probabilistic model because although we cannot really consider like specify which kind of uncertainty exists here, but with this probabilistic modeling, we can incorporate the impact of these uncertainties into our predictions. And we suggested that this framework should work on the component level. And the reason is that we could go towards element level, saying that, for example, we should focus on the rebars and this within the abutment and stuff like that. But there is a lot of there should be a lot of effort in order to implement these things. So we thought that going to the component level, because for the moment they use on the they do this kind of modeling on the asset level. So we thought that going towards component level is a very good compromise between the level of detail that is needed and also amount of the effort that they need to put in order to implement this methodology inside their existing asset management system. So after having this definition of components, we need to have the clear definition of the possible state. And these states are basically some basic values that shows the condition of different components. For example, in Switzerland, they use a scale between 1 to 5, where 1 shows the best condition and 5 shows the worst condition. And yeah, so by knowing these condition states, and now we need to know how is it likely that this condition state change over time. And this likelihood, we can use the past data that we have on the condition of this component using basically data-driven methods to come up with this. Or if you don't have this data, basically you can use the experiment to come up with that. And my colleague here, Steve, he also working on a methodology to come up with these predictions. All right. So the next step is to have definition of possible intervention activities along with the estimation of their cost and impacts on the service. And this is really important. By this, we mean that, for example, if your component is in condition state 3, 4, stuff like that, what kind of intervention activities is needed, and how much would it cost, and how much would it disturb the service. By having these, the next step is to identify intervention strategies. And usually these strategies exist. And by strategy, I mean, it's like basically a guideline where they send their inspectors, and inspectors say, for example, this deck is in condition state 2, so it's for the moment it's good, so we don't need to do anything because it can provide enough service for us. And yeah, so, but it's not always possible to follow these intervention strategies. For example, there is budget restriction, weather is bad, you cannot do this kind of stuff. So we suggested to use fault trees to approximate the probability of serviceability failure, basically. And we connected this to the condition state of the component, because if, for example, if there is a flood and you recently built your bridge, it's more likely that it resists towards this flood. Whereas if it is in bad conditions, if it's in condition state 4, it's more prone to damage. And yeah, so these are things that we consider. And also, there is difference here between the fault tree we develop here and the fault tree usually you see in the literature is that we consider serviceability failure here, whereas in conventional way they use structural failure. And we believe that because you should not think about that your bridge would collapse or something like that. So we consider serviceability failure, which also can provide very conservative approximation of the structure of failure. And yeah, we thought that this provides better overview for the asset manager. And of course, the final step is to estimate these kind of consequences of each top event. And by having that, asset manager can define a threshold on the level of risks, and basically you can prioritize these intervention requirements according to the level of risk. So as example, we implemented this methodology for steel truss bridge in Canton of Bern in Switzerland, and we can, so for example, bridge manager can really see this evolution of the conditions and intervention requirements, saying that, for example, there's a 60% chance that the truss for this specific bridge requires a replacement in the second planning period, and also it can provide the rough estimation of the cost and service disruption that is needed, and also basically this can be done for like multiple years, and then you can see the evolution of these conditions state very graphically here. Okay, and yeah, so this basically it's very general purpose, so you can apply this methodology for different kind of assets, for example, for the tracks, for the roads, and this kind of stuff. And also you can consider the life cycle of the asset basically, and failure risk connected to the condition state of the components. And yeah, next year we will present this work in IALCC conference in Milan, and yeah, I'm looking forward to that. All right, so after knowing what kind of intervention activity is needed, like by predicting that, the next step is to how to combine these intervention activities. If, for example, consider it's like pieces of puzzle, you found these pieces of puzzle, but it's important how you put these puzzles together. You can put them randomly and then you see it's a very bad picture, but in order to get that perfect picture, you need to find the best way to put them together. And it is important because for the moment, for example, we have, so for example, in the line, and they close some part of the line, they do some maintenance activities there, and it takes like 1 month or something. And then 2-3 months later, they go and do some other part thing on other part of the line. And if you look at it in like big picture, you see over 5 years, you have like 6 months of the closure in different time. So here the idea is that if there is this kind of intervention requirement in different part of the same network, you can take advantage of closure of one part and execute intervention in the other part, so that in total you have less disruption to the service. So the criteria we use to combine this kind of intervention activities is 3 different kind of dependencies. And the first one is very trivial. So it has to do with the proximity of these intervention activities. For example, if this switch in next year requires intervention and the other one requires in like 2 years later, you can say, yeah, so because we already closed this one, so let's do also on this switch as well. The other dependency we consider is structural dependency, which is inevitable to consider. For example, if you have a bridge here and you want to replace a deck, there is no way to do that without replacing the track on top of it. So these two have to be done together. And the last type of dependency we consider is topological dependency that has to do with the functionality. Again, consider we need to replace a deck of this bridge, and during this execution of this intervention, this switch behind that bridge is there, it is functional, and it will require intervention in 2 years. But you can say, yeah, in order to save some time, during the closure of this, I also execute intervention on this in order to maximize this availability to the network in total. And yeah, we define this in a mixed integer linear program. And we consider a line of 25 kilometers in Canton of Bern. And you can really see what are the result of this grouping. For example, you can say in specific year, these intervention activities can be done alongside each other. It can maximize the net benefit we can get out of this model. Okay. All right. So I mentioned we have this mixed integer linear program. And there is one big issue with this kind of exact approach, that if you work on a little example, they can solve the problem in a rather reasonable time. But if you want to apply this methodology on a large scale network, saying that a dense network like railway system in Switzerland, it might take you a lot of time. So there is one way that we can use a heuristic approach, that they are fast, but there's danger with that you might get to local optimal solution. So we didn't want to use this kind of heuristic approach. So we try to use decomposition techniques to accelerate these solution process, and we show that it can accelerate the solution process by 20 to 30%. It might not look very much, but if you consider if you need to run your program for a week, it can save you up for 2 days. So it is good. So we send the result of this work in a Journal of Infrastructure and Systems, and we are waiting for the moment for the response. So hopefully it gets through. All right. So these 3 questions were the one that, for the moment, I got the answer for, and I worked on that during my time now. And in the remaining time, I am going to be working on answering these two questions. And the next would be how to make sure that there's a compatibility between these kind of models. And it is important because if you want to present this to asset manager, they want to just push click and see everything there. And there is a bit of issue here. For example, I use R, my colleague Steve, he used Python. So we need to have one integrated place to see this workflow of the information from different databases using different level that has different level of detail. So we thought that maybe beam modeling is a very good environment to show this kind of workflow there and see the final result there. So it can give a very good overview of intervention activities and evolution of condition state over time for the asset managers. And the last part is seeing how this methodology can improve the current intervention and planning process. And it is a work that Steve and I will be working on. We will use the process modeling to see how much this implementation of this methodology can improve the overall process. All right, yeah, this was basically part of the work we do in our group in Institute of Construction and Infrastructure Management. And here, yeah, I'm working mostly with Sabis and Steve here. And we have a bunch of other direction that we work. For example, we work on the cost modeling, cycling infrastructure, a future development of infrastructure, and this kind of stuff. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Hamed. I think so. We have time for just maybe one quick question for Hamed at this point. Any questions?
No question, but I'm quite impressed with the level of detail, and I can see where this type of research could be very useful in modeling both infrastructure needs and planning for infrastructure investment within tight funding constraints, which in the U.S. is all too frequently what the problem is. So just an observation.
Great. Thank you. Then I guess since we are at time, I would like to thank everybody for attending and thank our speakers today for their presentations. Excellent opportunity to learn about your research. And I'd just like to say, so stay tuned for more information on the upcoming winter and spring session of VISIM that we'll be planning. So hopefully we'll have some more exciting presentations coming up. Thank you,
Adrian. Thank you for organizing this as well.
For organizing.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.